If we go to the first point, so open source, what does it exactly mean?
I've spent many years now in the HPC industry, and it turns out that the HPC world, in our opinion, is really split between sort of the public sector and the private sector. And in the HPC space in particular, there's probably a dozen workload managers, and I feel like there's been a lot of churn and a lot of effort put into workload management, but none of them, why are there really a dozen? It's because nobody can actually take over one of these spaces or the other and actually fulfill the full needs of both the public and the private sector at the same time. The best way to do that is with sort of de facto standards. But the reason that you can't is in the public sector, the folks playing their universities and research labs, they're risk takers, they're innovators, they're natural collaborators, whereas in the private sector, they just want tools to do a job, they're not really interested in taking risks, and they're actually natural competitors. And what this led to is that in the public sector, open source has become a real preference, and in the private sector, commercial software is not only sometimes a preference, but actually a real requirement for what they're doing. And we wanted to be able to provide something that actually bridged the gap between these two worlds, so that you could get one thing that could play both in the private sector, in the public sector, that's over here, and in the private sector. So actually what we announced and what we're delivering is PBS Professional dual licensed. So there's an open source license for PBS Pro, but there's also, we're continuing our commercial license for all of our commercial customers. So for them, nothing changes. But we're using a common core. So by having a single common core, not a stripped down version, not a limited version, we can actually then take all of the community innovations that get done in the private sector, we can move those over, in the public sector, move those over to the private sector. And we can also take some of the enterprise innovations that happen in the private sector and move them back. And we can really try to finally have something where there's the economy of scale, where the bulk of the HPC effort can go into sort of one thing that'll help the whole community, instead of have sort of two separate communities that are working independently. And so that's the same reason that we're actually really happy about what the Open HPC effort is doing. We're a founding member of Open HPC, and it's a similar. It's driven by a similar mission, which is to try to build a de facto standard that we can use to cross and marry the entire HPC community and really focus energy in one direction instead of focusing energy in all sorts of different directions. And with that, we think, I personally think, I'm even taking off my Altair hat, that this is a fantastic opportunity for the HPC community.
When I understand correctly, so if you have a paid license, you can get things like support, etc. Is that the idea?
So we're going to offer support, both commercial support for actually both versions, but we will still offer a commercial license. So what comes with the commercial license is the usual legal stuff, indemnification, and everything else. We also have a full set of commercial tools, and so that's actually a good segue into the other two things that we announced, which will be part of the enterprise tool set that you can get from Altair, which are, in addition to the existing commercial tools that we have for end user end user engineer and end user scientist portals for job submission and especially for remote visualization, which is actually really important.